Good afternoon, Tom Ginn. Elevate your profits. Hey, I was out last week traveling and got jumped in for a few minutes with Mark. I'm going to bring Mark in right now. We're going to roll this out this evening and introduce our guest here in a moment. But before I'm going to bring Mark in right now. Man, it's good actually seeing your face again, Mark.
Oh, man. Well, I'll tell you, you've been away for about a week, right? Road trip. That was an elongated road trip for you, I know. I put a little blurb out. I did a 2-day road trip. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see my son play due to that C word thing, that C word 19 thing. I don't want to say it, man. I don't want to get, ostracized by the FB patrol out there. But it is what it is, and we had a good ride and spent the night in Columbia and came back last night, and here we are. And I'm excited. This to me is always, I say, Magnificent Monday, and it is. It's all a matter of how you look at the Monday. Monday can be a great day if you develop that mindset. And had a great day today, man. Rocked and rolled with about 82 calls out there. So, I'm looking forward to tonight's guest, and I'll let you talk, Tom, about our guest here, Mr. Tom Gavin, what he's all about and what makes him rock and roll.
I'd be glad to, but I just want to make sure our audience really understands the purpose of Elevate Your Profits. We're all about, I'm an entrepreneur. Mark's not. Anytime you're in sales, you're an entrepreneur, no matter what type of business you're associated with. And I believe that winning is about hearing other people's story, what type of challenges they've gone through, the things the people they lean into, the coaching and the mentoring, how they get through obstacles. So our guests that we bring on have a tremendous amount of experience in life and in business. And we just want to be able to share that out there because we never know who we're going to touch with a message to help somebody improve their lives in and around business. So tonight, I'm really excited to bring in our guest, Tom Gavin. And we're bringing him in. You ready, Tom? There he is.
Hey, guys.
Hey, what's up, man?
Did you ever think this would ever happen live like this?
No, absolutely, man. Look at you. You look great. You got the tie on. We're honored that you're wearing a tie. I just want you to know that.
How I was raised. It's how I roll.
Oh, I'm telling you, man.
My dad used to teach me, respect your industry. And in whether it was radio, well, radio, it's been a long time since I was in radio or on the air. It was still a suit and tie world when I was still in it. But now in real estate, it's rare that you see anybody, and I'm not knocking people that dress casually, but I still respect the industry and respect the forum. I try to wear certainly a suit and tie whenever it's a meeting, a settlement meeting, or certainly a listing presentation. But my father says used to say you can never go wrong. You can always take the tie off and dress down. But if you show up underdressed, yeah, you're trapped.
Oh my gosh, Mark, you and I were in trouble tonight, man.
You guys are fine.
Hey, man, we have another Bostonian, New England up there. Ron Goodwin says, hello, Mr. DJ. So I guess evidently that's geared at you, Mr. Tom Gavin. Huh?
He must have read the bio.
Absolutely. So Ron, thank you for being here. Appreciate you being here.
I'm looking. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I'm looking forward to it since the day that Tom and I first discussed this about a month ago.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I always like to do a plug for how we all really got connected here. The circles you surround yourself dictates where you're going and where you're heading in life, and that's through the Grow Life Academy. You're also a member as well.
Member, and I try to make all of those Thursday night meetings. And our dear friend Ken, I hope is recovering and is back to full productivity. He was down for the count here for a few days, but we hope to see him this week.
I got to put up here.
You got to share these comments. Yeah,
I got to. Thanks, Ron.
We'll cut your tie short. Yeah, tell him, Ron.
It's one of my favorite ties too, Ron. Cool it. Easy.
And we got our great Robert Brooker on tonight. Thanks for showing up. Share this out with everybody. But as we get rolling here, Tom, I always like to hear, your story. Where are you from? A little bit of background that you want to share. I know you started in the, you as a young person in the radio industry. So just share your story, and then, we'll just throw questions at you for clarity or that type of thing. So it's all yours, Tom.
It started out almost by accident. I was in second or third grade, and back in the 60s in Western Massachusetts, there wasn't a lot to do in the wintertime, because some years you would have an awful lot of snow, some years you had, but you had a lot of cloudy, cold days. So my dad was a skier, and we used to go skiing on weekends. And on a Saturday afternoon in February of 1964, we get back in, and we would take day trips to one particular ski area about an hour west of my hometown. And and that was back in the days when there were still afternoon newspapers. Our local area newspaper was always an afternoon edition. There was not a morning paper at the time. And he grabbed the afternoon paper, and we got into the front seat of the Chevy Impala, and he showed me the front page, and he says, "These guys with the long hair, these freaks, are going to be on television tomorrow night. They're called the Beatles, and they're going to be gone in about 2 weeks." And I'm in either second or third grade. I'm a little guy. And the last thing I'm interested in is these guys. My father said, "We're going to watch these guys with the long hair, and because they're not going to be around in a couple of weeks." So I forgot about it. But the next night, he dragged my brother and I down. We're upstairs doing our homework. And the next night, he drags both of us down to watch these guys on the Ed Sullivan show. And I was somewhat intrigued, but I wasn't really overwhelmed. But the next day in school, we went to a parochial school. The next day in school, everybody's talking about these guys. In fact, one of the older kids was wearing a Beatle wig. And like we all lived, if you were alive in that era, you lived through the Beatle cards and the Beatle magazines and I didn't get so much bitten by that bug as I did about the music. Then discovered that about 50 miles south of my hometown, there was a top 40 station, and AM, back in the days when AM still ruled music. And I became addicted to what went on inside the radio, what behind the scenes. And so I got caught up in the music and all of this, not just the Beatles, but the 60s, the British Invasion and things like the Beach Boys. And it was fun music. It was upbeat. It was positive, and everybody was listening to it. And I just got really curious about the radio business. And about age 16, I was home on a rainy night, and we had I guess you call them penny savers in some parts of the country. We called them the town crier where I was. And it's a newspaper that comes out, and there's nothing but ads in it. And I'd done something wrong, and my father grounded me for the night. I forget what I did, but I was not leaving the house that night. So I'm sprawled on the living room rug, and I'm just going through the want ads just for something to do. And there was an ad in there for a weekend radio announcer at a radio station about 25, 30 miles north of my hometown in Brattleboro, Vermont. And they were looking for a radio announcer, but I had been so intrigued with radio that I'd taken the Greyhound bus down to Boston to the U.S. Customs House and had taken the FCC license to be able to maintain and operate the transmitter. This is about 1971, to be able, when radio stations still took meter readings every hour on the transmitters. So the jock on the air had to not only fulfill his duties and obligations, but there was usually a clipboard, and he had to take meter readings. And without the license, you couldn't operate the transmitter. That's all since gone away now, all these years later. So I went down, took the test, had to take a couple of bus trips down to pass all three elements of the test, because the study guides that were available to buy, there was no internet, of course, and the study guides were out of date. I passed the first two sections fine, and the third section I had to go down 3 times before I passed it. It was called Element 9, and it was more of the technical side of it. So I finally, almost like by the process of elimination, I finally passed that level of test. So I got the license, got a friend of mine. I didn't have my driver's license at the time. The radio station called up. They said, well, come on up and make a tape. We'll do an audition. We still have an opening. And the station manager is doing these shifts on the weekend because we don't have anybody to fill them. So after school, my friend drives me up to WKBT in Brattleboro, Vermont. I run in there, and for a small town radio station, they had some pretty decent equipment. I say that now because I worked in some real dumps afterwards. And there was the place was clean. I mean, it was the stuff, everything worked, which was unusual for small market radio. So the guy sat me behind a conference table that was used for like a panel discussion series of talk shows. Pretty sophisticated station for its time. And so I read the newscast. He tapes it. He's in the other studio. And he comes out and he says, all right, I got you on tape. You sound pretty good. We'll let you know if we need you. And I'm on the way out the door is Brattleboro's the same as when I left it. All right, Ron. Okay. I just remember that long hill as you went into town up to Main Street. I worked at the other station in town up on Putney Road. Nobody else is interested in that, but Ron Goodwin and I. But so the guy comes out, Dave Kaler comes out and says, we'll let you know. And I said, Mr. Kaler, just so you know, I have my FCC license if you decide to hire me. And I reached into now I've got a Converse, I'm a high school kid, got a Converse sneakers, Levi jeans. I may have had a tie on with a shirt, probably. My dad raised me better than that, with probably an Oxford button-down shirt. But I pulled the license out, and it's in like 30 folded pieces. And he said, let me take a look at that. And he said, what are you doing with that thing in your pocket? This has to go in a frame on the wall. And he said, can you start Saturday? And I said, well, I just got to get a ride. I couldn't drive there. I lived 20 miles south of there. So I took care of that, got the job. I had been making reel-to-reel tapes in my bedroom for about 2 years, playing disc jockey. I mean, just a fan of the industry and not knowing what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go after high school, though I knew I was going to college somewhere. And that's how it all started. And I think by sheer enthusiasm and interest and a willingness I took off the track. I volunteered for the live remotes when nobody else wanted to do them. I mean, you talk about a kid that was in the candy store. I would have paid them if I had any cash to pay them, because of just being able to say I was on the air. And that's how it started. And, weekends grew to filling in during the summer or when somebody got sick, and it just blossomed from there. It was just a great run through my high school years.
I got a question for you. So was this a music stations? I don't think talk radio was a big deal.
It was an AM station at 1490 up by the glove compartment, a CBS affiliate, news on the hour, middle of the road music. I used to think of it as an old person station, but at least I got in the door and got some exposure. And I loved it. It was something that, at the time I didn't have any options to do anything else. And as I grew up, it grew, and it was a station across town, played a lot more current music. Eventually they hired me. And then I got some weekend work down in the Greenfield, Massachusetts, Orange, Mass area on small stations. And eventually I ended up out in the Berkshires in Pittsfield, where they sat me down and said, listen, you may have been a great DJ in the small towns, but we really have a sophisticated sound here. And you just don't have the sound we're looking for, but we don't want to fire you or send you home. We're going to make you a salesman, because when you go out with the sales guys, they always seem to sell more when you go out with them. Because I would take a tape recorder and cut a commercial for the customer, whoever we were going to call on. And usually it was a customer that they couldn't sell any advertising to. So I would go in the studio, the production studio, and cut a spot. And again, this is like nothing but enthusiasm is responsible for my success up to this point. It's not knowledge. It's not effort. It's just enthusiasm. And I would go into these Ford dealers or banks or supermarkets and say, all right, Charlie, here's what I got for you. Here's a spot that we think we should run 50 times, and you ought to put some extra help on because you're going to put some people in the showroom, and the trick is you got to sell them something. And the station ownership got wind of that, because the sales guys would go back and talk about it. And here's this young kid, barely out of high school, having some success in converting people that some of the sales guys couldn't get to advertise on the station. So one thing led to another. And I guess without realizing it, I was told later that I increased my value, but just because of dumb luck and not knowing any better.
You know, enthusiasm, I think, goes a long ways, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. I didn't know it then, but I know it now.
We got.
I did, yeah. I gave out free samples. We used to call them spec tapes. And again, it was a little cassette tape recorder. And I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew what my instinct told me to do. Throw some music behind the thing, put it on a cassette tape, out the door we roll, and hope that somebody likes the message and likes my sound.
Wow.
And explain to the crowd out here, just in case, what a cassette tape is.
Well, I noticed that the latest Paul McCartney album, I think it's been issued on, obviously, downloads, CD, vinyl, and cassette tape. I mean, for the real purists out here.
Right.
So cassette tape was the first real breakthrough of being able to put a piece of audio on a piece of acetate and to actually be able to take it out and play it mobilely on without having to have a whole studio.
So, Tom, you started out with the high school through excitement, enthusiasm, and all that. Where did that lead you next? Where did that transition? You didn't just do that for a few years.
No. I went to a community college in my hometown, Greenfield Community College, and I went for about 2 weeks because at that point, the fellow that owned the other radio station in Brattleboro called me up and he says, "Hey, I hear you're doing some good things." He said, "Why don't you come work for me? I'll teach you the business." His name is Jack Healy. And you talk about symbolic people in your lives. Jack Healy is one of them. May he rest in peace. I was a maverick. I was uncontrollable, but I was with a top 40 station. And the station was doing so well, he and his wife really didn't care what we did on the air as long as it sounded good. They didn't have a large network commitment to CBS radio like the other station across town. It sort of was a stodgy, old fuddy-duddy radio station. And the program director had a very loose playlist, and you could really become a boss jock or sound like a boss jock. And I look back at this now thinking, had we all of us had some training, had we had a coach back then, none of us got very far from that level of broadcasting in the business. I didn't get in terms of on-air ability. I did some on-air work when I worked in Springfield, Mass. I did some weekend work in Hartford, some work up in Rochester, but I was always tied to this business end of the industry, which is how I got hired in those places, because I had the knack to be able to convert customers to cash spending customers on those stations. A guy took a liking to me in Pittsfield, Mass, named Ron Stratton. I got hired in Springfield, Mass, with him at a station called WSPR. And then when he went to Rochester, New York, he took me there. When he went to Cincinnati, Ohio, to manage 2 stations, he took me there. And I ended up becoming his sales manager and spending less and less time on the air because I just didn't, frankly, have the sound for the middle markets that they were looking for. And we're to the point then where ratings played a more significant role than small markets, where it really didn't matter because there were so few choices up and down the AM dial. Now, forget, this is the mid-'70s, late '70s. So it was a wild ride, loved every second of it. And then it just boosted me to other things and exposed me to medium and major markets, but on the business side of things.
So what I hear, you didn't have the voice for radio, right? And you're too good looking for the face of radio. So you had 2 strikes against you, right?
Back then, I think the pipes were important. You're talking about 1975 to maybe 1982, 81. Where when I got to Baltimore, I mean, I worked around some really dynamic voices that were well known in the community, very well known, and they'd been stoic for decades. And I was out of my league, and they didn't hire me for that. They wanted somebody that could run a sales department, could motivate people. I always seemed to work for the stations that didn't have that had low ratings because of the creative way that we had to find to merchandise and market the radio station and to turn a profit. And I had good teams of people around me that seemed to always make me look good.
And there you go.
Question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, you talked about boss jocks, and can you elaborate on who you tried to emulate as being a DJ initially? Can you name some people back in the? I know we're going back to yesteryear, but I think it is important. You know, you brought up some things that you did and how you had to secure revenues for radio stations. Who were some of the top-notch people, like in your area, Tom? That
I think that all of us in when we were in high school and junior high school, we wanted to be like the guys on the big 50,000 watt clear channel stations growing up in New England. And there was a station out of Buffalo called WKBW, which was at 1520. And when the sun went down, that 50,000 watt blowtorch of a signal would cover up and down the East Coast, and it would sound like it was in next door. The signal was so clear. And there were guys like Don Burns, Jack Armstrong. Many of these guys had passed on, but they had a station, they had a sound and a rhythm to the radio station that the top 40 sound was contagious, and it was fun, and it was you turned the radio on to escape your troubles back in those days. Now I understand times change, and and the feel of the market, the feel of the business has become much more of a business and a much more bottom line industry. Certainly it was then too, but back then station groups could only own couldn't own more than 2 or 3 stations in a given market. Now conglomerates can own stations, 6 or 7 in a market. Right. And you can control the listenership of a particular format with just one group owner. And things have changed. I haven't been in it in a long time. But you would try to emulate stations like KB Radio out of Buffalo, WDRC. Arnie Ginsberg was before my time, Ron, but he was on MEX in Boston. But he was a legend. But WRKO 680 in Boston. That was where the term boss jock radio really started, is because of the Bill Drake type sound. I think they debuted in '68, and they were strong through the early '70s. WDRC in Hartford, WHYN in Springfield is where I first got hooked on top 40 radio. They were about 50 miles south of my hometown at 560 on the dial, but at sunset, all these AM stations had to either lower their power or switch their direction of their antenna. Otherwise, they would interfere. Being on AM, that the signal would interfere with some other station, maybe 200 miles away. And you don't have that with FM. So there were some limitations. The bigger stations could be heard crystal clear, like the one in Buffalo, because the stations locally had to just shut down. They were called daytimers. So it was a different landscape back in those days, but it was a lot of fun and very exciting to listen to. I got to play a piece of it in a very small market way until I got into ownership or group ownership later in my career, in a very small market way, with a gentleman that saw something in me and made me a part owner of a group that owned 5 small market radio stations.
Awesome. That is awesome, man. And it was a fun time back then. Now, you being a young salesperson out there banging on doors, were you nervous? I
didn't know any better.
That's what I was going to get to.
I didn't know any better. When I was working for Jack Healy at WTSA in Brattleboro, he just gave me a rate card and he says, "You seem to know, what you're doing." He says, "Go out there and see what you can do." And I would just, again, take the cassette tape, go out, get to know the customer, come back in the next day, play a spot for him, and almost dictate that this is what we're going to do. You're going to run this about 50 times. I'm going to come by on Saturday and help you, push away the crowds that'll be at the door. And not that that really happened, but there were times that they did need extra salespeople on a car showroom floor, or if it was a supermarket. I was big on doing live broadcasts.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
A remote where the DJ was I once played Monopoly in a clothing store window in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, with another guy for 72 hours nonstop to raise money for a charity. By the end of that, you know how sick I am. I got so sick of Monopoly. I probably just wanted to go home and go to bed. I didn't care who won, who lost, but it was for a good charity. The advertiser was happy. It was late spring, early summer. The weather was good. People came out. It was just a great promotion. But I did a lot of those live broadcasts. Again, an era for the industry that just doesn't exist anymore. And again, times change. And I've maintained we got to change with the times or we'll be left in the dust.
Right.
I'm going to speak my age a little bit. I remember when I was a kid, I'm just a couple of years older than you, Ron, but I remember me listening to Wolfman Jack I made my own crystal radio. I don't know if you ever did one of those, take little crystals, I don't know what they call them. You put them all together and you could get a station. I used to listen at 2:00 in the morning, Wolfman Jack. On this little thing that I made. That was about my highest level of technology. So
that was when you lived in California then, right?
Yeah.
Because he was on Extra out of San Diego, XTRA, as I recall.
Yeah.
And because it was licensed to a town in Mexico, in Tijuana, I think. And there were no FCC rules noting how limited you could had to keep the wattage of the radio station. And as I have heard and read, Extra would just crank that thing up to 100,000 watts, and and after sundown, that thing would go up and down the west coast, the seacoast, like a blowtorch. And that's how Wolfman became as famous as he is or was.
Right.
I think he's gone now too.
Yes. What was the FCC back then, Tom? Was it like the Wild Wild West and on the AM stations? Could you guys pretty much do your own thing, or did they pretty much regulate you back then as well?
You didn't want as I was told by the station ownership and station management, you didn't want them. The FCC inspector could walk in any time of the day. So we were always schooled to keep our meter readings up to date, to sign off on the log, to sign in on the log. We had these program logs that would have itemized everything that had to happen on the air in terms of almost down to they gave you leeway of 15 minutes either way, but you had to keep a timeline of everything that occurred on the air. And I mean, the commercials and what time the spots ran. I mean, it was pretty detailed. I mean, it was all manual back then. This is before computers. I mean, the first computer I ever saw was in the science center of my high school in my junior year. And that thing was like a freaking, it was like
a box.
A Zenith radio, the old big ass Zenith radios that your grandmother would have. I mean, that size of a contraption. And I went to high school. I sat next to Penn Jillette in my junior year, but he was always, and that's another story for another time, but Penn was always in the science center, and he monopolized that. I could never get any computer time with Penn and Teller on the computer in the computer section of my high school. But those things were huge back in the 70s, and you knew they were coming. We just didn't know much about them, and they only had so much functionality.
Sure.
And who would think? Here we are in the age of live streaming, getting to create your own broadcast in an infinite world with very little regulation. I think if we said some things that might be contrary to algorithm, we might get shut down, but things have changed, haven't they?
And look at us now. Look what have we become? Look at the three of us.
I know. It's insane.
But when my thing started moving along, I was fortunate to be around great people that took a liking to me and saw the potential in a very, very rough young person that had lots of enthusiasm, lots of energy, was willing to work for peanuts just for the opportunity. And because of that, and I just, out of dumb luck, doors were opening for me that I really didn't have any control in opening. It's just people took a liking to me, and I just I didn't have any fear because I didn't know fear. And I was in the right place at the right time, more times than I could count, many times, and I didn't realize it until several years later.
You know, Tom, you just said something I think it's really important that people hear, is that you had a passion for what you're doing. You were willing to do it for free. And I guess in many cases you were, in retrospect, you didn't go into this thing and say, hey, listen, I'm going to pay me a lot of money up front, then we'll figure out if I'm good for the job. You just went out and demonstrated that. And I think that's an important message for anybody out there, when, especially starting out anything. Just roll up your sleeves and give it everything you got, and somebody will take notice.
Pay your dues and hope somebody notices. And the first check I got from that full-time on-air job in Brattleboro, not the first station, but the second station across town, the rock and roller. I remember it was $165. And I had to pay rent. I had to buy, and I was rooming with 2 other DJs, and that made it easy. But I look back then, how am I going? I was working 48 hours a week for $165 in 1974, and going to school part-time. But it was nothing but energy and a passion, which I didn't realize at the time. I'm thinking, because I'd seen my dad's work ethic and the way that he would go after things. He was a food broker, and he would just get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go out, dress up, suit and tie, out to see his customers, and he'd come back 8 o'clock at night, every day. And right. I thought, and I'm thinking, well, everybody does it this way. And it wasn't until years later that you start realizing that different people have different outlooks about careers, occupations. Somebody said to me once, he says, you and your dad have the trait, the quality, maybe it's in your genes from your grandparents, but you're the kind of people that won't always be working for somebody. And his name was Bain Bernier. And I played records in bars at the University of Massachusetts when disco hit in the mid 70s. And Dad helped me get that job. There's this restaurant called The Pub right in the center of Amherst. It recently closed. My dad was their food broker. And so the owner had a problem with whoever he was using as a DJ. And he said, well, I told you, Tommy, that's what they called me, Tommy. Tommy does this up in Pittsfield, and he does it for a couple of small bars out in the county. So they brought me over, and I had a good run at this place for about 3 years, and it was a real quality college crowd. And I learned an awful lot because of my reputation that I didn't realize my father had in the food industry. Because several of the restaurant owners in the area would come in and they would meet me and said, you know what, we think your dad's company is a piece of crap. The drivers are late because he's a food broker, right? The orders are wrong. This is wrong, that's wrong. But when we need something, we know we can call your dad and he'll be here in an hour. And so I said, geez, I got to model myself after that. And then later in life, I've done that, especially with the real estate. But prior to that, when I used to book bands and DJs, you talk about a pack of characters. Try dealing with a bunch of egos of bands, and not that they were all bad, but some of the bands that I dealt with, and then the mobile disc jockeys when the mobile DJ craze took over in the 90s. And I'm thinking, I remember knocking on guys' doors on Saturday mornings at 10:30 saying, you got a wedding at 2 o'clock to be at a banquet hall. I want to get your ass out of bed because they're going to be calling me at 1 if you're not there. So I felt like I was a human resource expert as well as a talent agent. And I look back now, fellas, I think I may have refunded almost as much money at times as I took in, constantly trying to clean up what some of these fellows, not all of them, but some of them just created. Had I known then what I would have known now, I would not have expanded in that business as fast as I did. The money was fast and furious, but as I said, I think I ended up doing more adjustments than sometimes it took in.
So, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say that was the era of, when you started out, live music and a lot of bands, and it was a lot of fun. And it was what I call the innocent climb in the music industry. And then they found out they could make a profit. and then things kind of, becomes the disease of me. And all I was going to ask you, Tom, when you started out in this, did you ever imagine going outside of radio? Did you want to always stay in it? And what made you like move forward into another vocation? I mean, were you ready for it at the time, or do you remember?
I do. When I was in Baltimore, I got transferred from Cincinnati. Station in Cincinnati was album rock, and it had. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Death Before Disco. I'm sorry.
Right.
I think I had a T-shirt like that. So,
well, disco made me a lot of money in those bars.
I know. I know.
When I was in Cincinnati with an FM station, the signal actually was north of town. It was in a little suburb called Hamilton, Ohio. So we really couldn't reach some of the sections of the greater Cincinnati metropolitan area, which meant when the Arbitron was the radio ratings company that would measure the audience and tell the ad agencies who had the most listeners. So we always seem to be on the lower level of the roster of stations, and we were always competing with a real blowtorch of a signal coming out of Cincinnati, an FM rocker, and we were like number 2. So we were constantly being in sales, having a little bit to do with the on-air product, but not much now. This is about late 70s. Our ownership came in and said, because we were always struggling to make a profit, we finally got the station into the black. Station's really good, morale's high. Station hasn't had this much success in a long time. And our owners that were minority owned came in and with a consultant told them, listen, the days of music on AM are coming to an end. Our AM side was a very successful R&B soul station. Hip hop didn't exist, rap didn't exist, but a very successful AM station, very active in the minority community in Cincinnati. But the consultant said, if you don't make the switch from what you're doing on AM to one of your FM signals, somebody else is going to come in and do it for you with the way that listenership is picking up on FM. And they're going to clean your clock and put you out of business on this very profitable, successful AM station. So the owner came in and decided to just flip the switch, fire everybody, and he did. And he took care of people in terms of severances, and he offered other positions in his company. He owned about 7 radio stations, but he got rid of the struggling rock format because of our limited signal. However, the signal covered the territory where an R&B station would do well in greater Cincinnati. And then he offered my boss and me a position at 2 stations that he had just recently bought in Maryland, in Baltimore. That's how I reached Baltimore. And I had 3 good years here. And then what happened was I was always on the street, get to know my customers. I sold the way my dad sold. Cup of coffee, piece of pie, what can I do for you? Anything you need, just call me. And I ran into a very successful retailer in the furrier business. Our AM station in Baltimore was a format called The Music of Your Life, which was a pre-rock and roll 30s, 40s. This is 1979, 1980. So Glenn Miller on the radio meant a lot to these older people because they were still alive. And it brought back a lot of memories. So it was pre-rock and roll. Johnny Mathis, Peggy Lee.
Sure.
Stuff you might hear on XM. I don't know what form. Like the stuff that seriously Sinatra might play on XM on that station now. So, and it was an AM station, again, limited signal. You could hear it great during the day, but at night we had to adjust the pattern, being an AM station. And you could barely hear us at the Baltimore Beltway. And one of my customers ran the largest furrier in Maryland, was a radio junkie just like I was. He bought a suburban station in Bel Air, Maryland. And he says, listen, I want to take you with me. I'll make you a deal you can't refuse. I'll give you a piece of the radio station for nothing. Just come out and you can pay off what I would charge to sell it to you in sweat equity. Well, that was a tough choice because the guy I had been working with in Maryland had been with him 9 years, through Springfield, Mass, Pittsfield, Mass, Rochester, New York, Cincinnati, and now Baltimore. So I took it. burned a lot of bridges at the time, though we've made up since then. But I saw an opportunity, and then here I am in small town radio where I started, and we had no ratings. And I used to kid around. The only time we had listeners on our little station in Bel Air is if it snowed. People would want to know if the schools are open, or if somebody lost their dog. They want to call the local radio station. Can you put my lost dog announcement on there? We did anything. I even did play-by-play volleyball for a high school volleyball league.
Oh, my God.
Let me tell you why. The guy's daughter, the top player's daughter on the local volleyball team, was a car dealer. And we figured we'd go in and sell him. If he could sponsor the broadcast, we'd put his daughter's volleyball team on the radio on Sunday afternoons. Now I'm thinking, well, who's going to do the play-by-play? And it ended up being me. And I'm thinking, how creative can you get trying to do play-by-play? I mean, there's another guy that worked with me, but it was just those things that you did in small market radio. You know, the school lunch menus, the weather reports from certain sections of the county, obituaries. I mean, that was the kiss of death if you read obituaries on the air in most markets, right? Small town radio, that's how you ran it. And then consequently, we had some success there. He actually bought that station from the local newspaper, the local little weekly newspaper. And then he branched out to a station north of Washington, D.C., and then a station in Thurmont, Maryland, up near Camp David, and then a couple of other stations up in southern Pennsylvania. So it was a great ride. And I thought that when we finally did decide to cash our chips in, I never looked back because of the opportunities that people gave me and the fact that maybe some dumb luck, right place, right time, didn't know any better. But I gave me the opportunities, and just because of the way I was raised with character and values, I seized them and ran with them.
So Mark, I got anything there? But I just want to see, now when did you make the transition out of the radio business? Whatever.
What year? Like what year?
1980, early 85.
Okay.
85. And one of my techniques for hiring DJs on these stations, because we couldn't pay them anything. The stations, I think our biggest billing month was at one of these stations was either about $22,000 a month in total sales, total billing at our station in north of Washington. Well, you got a lot of, even those days, you got a lot of overhead. So DJs don't make any money. And in many situations, they still don't, unless you're the main guy on morning radio. And in many stations, the voices you hear after 10 a.m. are voices that may have been voice tracked or recorded earlier and just dropped in because of the way computers can actually synchronize the spot breaks and the station breaks. And I'm so far removed from it now, I don't want to sound like an expert because I'm far from one now. But it's just, if you're not the main guy in a day part that's generating big revenue for the station, you're sort of forgive me, but I think that we're looked upon as necessary, or they're looked upon as necessary evils. And if there's a way for corporate America to cut those expenses out, they would be. So they don't pay a lot. But back in those days, we didn't pay anything because we just didn't have it. So I would make a deal with the guys on the air. Listen, you come to work for us. This is all that we can pay you for your work on the air. But what I can do is I can book your weddings and parties because of this DJ thing is starting to catch on. We've got the music here at the station. We'll put together some equipment. It looked pretty awful, pretty choppy with the old stuff that we just put together. But as the years went on, and you can look at this technology that the industry has today, I mean, it's really good stuff. It's become a big, big business. But some of these guys, when I was booking these shows for them on weekends, were making more working for me as mobile DJs on weekends than they were making at the radio station. And that stuff. So when we finally got out of that end of the business and we sold those stations, I moved on to just becoming a booking agent with a lot of the catering company contacts that I had in Baltimore, Washington. And I did that for a long time and had a great, great run with it. The one regret I have, and I've said this to a couple of people that I have run into that have since left the business as well, is that I think that a bunch of us stayed in that business. We made great money, great life, living in the fast lane. The one quality that I'm proud that I always had is I was never a drinker. And because I saw so many careers go downhill, both on the air, radio management, it just never appealed to me. So I was able to function every day the next day. But when I got into the business of booking bands and DJs, and then after a while, the teeter-totter started to tilt. You weren't booking as many bands, it was all DJs. And in the probably mid to late 80s, it started to turn. And your high-end events would have live bands, but most of your mainstream events would have DJs. I think I stayed in it along with some of my peers 10 years too long, because you're looking at where's your future? Where's my future? Where are we going? And then one day my life changed when the phone rang. And a young lady was planning a 15th Spanish birthday party for her daughter. And the banquet hall recommended us. And she calls up and she says, "Can you do a Spanish quinceañera?" Now, back in those days, I was saying, "Sure, we can. No, that's great. Sign her up. We'll figure it out later." And this is almost like a wedding. It is so high end. And how are we on time? I don't want to run over my time.
You're good. You're good.
Okay. All right. But she came into my life 7 years ago at the right time. And again, I'm starting to think, geez, now what? What am I going to do next? This is the hours are getting pretty steep on me. I'm not getting any younger, though I feel like I'm in great shape. And I'm thinking, what's the next 20 years are going to be like? This woman walks into my life, just recently divorced, tough end to her marriage. I had been married, tough end to my marriage, and we connected intellectually. She was a single mother with a full-time real estate career, driving a BMW, and I'm thinking, how do I be that? How do I get there? So we took care of her daughter's party, but we started not seeing each other romantically, but I'm looking for somebody just as a companion, someone to go out to dinner with, someone to talk about what are you reading? What movies have you watched? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And the woman turned my life upside down. And we had a pact for a number of months. We would go out together, but it was always separate cars, separate checks, and at the end of the night, separate destinations. And then about 11 months later, we became a real couple. And then she made the speech that changed my life. You ready, guys?
I'm ready.
I took it. I don't know if Tom Goodwin, right? Is that his name? Our friend from Boston.
Ron.
Oh, Ronnie.
I'm sorry. I'm getting all carried away with this. I didn't mean to. But,
hey, Tom, can you keep the excitement level down? You kind of get amped up, man. I'm telling you. I think it's great. This is how I used to sell airtime, and how when I had the mobile DJ when there was nobody left and they couldn't find anybody else. When I would do shows like this, is try to create a great experience. But I grew up in New England, so I took Damaris to 3 games in Boston, see the Sox. And on the way back, we had like a 6-7 hour ride on the way back down to Maryland. And she had a presentation. And remember those old high school loose leaf notebooks with the big ring binder? Yep. She had those prepared with a business plan in it. And she says, if we're going to stay together, if we're going to be a couple, this DJ thing, this booking these guys and you chasing these guys and not getting your phone calls returned and having to talk to customers that aren't happy with some of their performance, this stuff's got to end or else I'm leaving. And she's 4'11", right? There's 10 years difference between us, but she says, I'm telling you right now, I like what we have and I want to build it, but unless you toe the line with what I'm about to propose, I'm out of here. And she says, I want to go into business with you. I need someone like you that can go out and find me real estate listings. Everybody likes you. You're a people person. You're not afraid of anything. I've seen you have doors slammed in your face. I've seen you get up and just knock on the door again. You never. I chased her for 6 months. You wouldn't take no for an answer with me, and because she kept saying, no, I don't want to mess this up. We have too good of a professional thing going here, and got my license. Went to work, didn't know anything about
real estate, read everything I could. She taught me, her boss taught me. We hired a coach out of Dallas, Texas named Hoss Pratt, another one of the most influential people in my life. Went to see him for 3 days, gave me a process, gave me a system. And again, luck of the Irish. Is there a horseshoe in my behind? I don't know. Off we take. And we haven't looked back.
Wow.
I'm very grateful. Luckiest guy in the world.
You know, you bring, I believe your energy draws to the world what you need when you need it. I honestly believe that is what you put out comes back to you in like, and if not multiples. So, yeah, I know we're getting close to a hard stop here. I know Mark has a commitment that has to be kept, or
well, I just
may not have a relationship.
Pick this up another time. I think we barely, the three of us have barely scratched the surface.
I know. I just wanted to say that was like your 3-2 count in your life there.
You know, right?
You know what? Yeah, what you just did.
I never thought of it that way. You are so right.
You know, you could have looked at
my life around. I never looked back.
Right. You know, so that's one thing I wanted to point out. The other thing I was just going to ask you real quick, what do you do to get yourself amped up for, like, what does Tom Gavin do in the morning to get himself ready for his day?
Well, I connect with someone that we all know. I read or listen to some of his stuff. And his name is Mr. Jeffrey Gittimer.
Yes.
A day in my life does not. And I found him in the Baltimore Business Journal. And I thought he was a local guy, like a columnist. And I would buy, right, yes. I would read his, I would buy the Baltimore Business Journal. I was single. I would eat in diners because I never cooked. And I would pick up the Business Journal out of the newsstand, the box on the corner. And for the purpose of only reading his sales moves was the name of the column.
Right.
And I thought he was a Baltimore guy. Little did I know
right.
He looked like for 70 freaking papers.
Yes, he did.
I saw him in person 4, 5, 6 times. I've had a couple of conversations with him, and he and I had a conversation about maybe a year ago about maybe attending one of his writers' weekends down in North Carolina. I didn't make it, but Jen and I talked about that. And I still want to write a book, but my schedule at the moment just won't allow us to get away that long. I know he'd tell me that was an excuse, and it probably is.
Right.
But we have. I have every book of his, and a piece of him. Right now, I'm reading the Napoleon Hill book that he rewrote, and he corrected me on the title a couple of Saturdays ago on his 9:59 broadcast. So I don't want to blow it again. But him, Jim Rome. Trying to think of what else there's about 4 or 5 books that I listen to snippets out of. Throughout audiobooks, and then I'll read a couple of pieces of spiritual material.
Is this the one you're talking about here?
Living Truth or Truthful Living?
Truthful Living. Very good book. Yes.
Truthful Living. And the audio, I don't have the hard copy, but the audio book, because it's him reading it, and you can hear. First of all, I like this guy right away. I didn't know who he was, but I'm thinking Philly guy with an attitude. That's what hooked me about Jeffrey. I call him Mr. Gittimer, and because I'm thinking this guy isn't taking grief from anybody, and that's the guy. I greatly admired him before I knew anything about him, and this is like 20 years ago. So he asked me what gets me going in the morning. I want somebody who's going to kick my behind and tell me when I'm wrong, and maybe praise me a little bit when I'm right, but also tell me I always can do better. And you get that with Mr. Gittimer.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So
I like the way. That's right. Jeffrey lovingly kicks your ass when you read. Isn't that the truth?
Yes.
I just want to say thanks for everybody that's jumped on. Robert and Lona, and
we're going to have to pick this up again and bring this guy back. I mean, I already got an adrenaline shot here, so
Can I close with something?
Sure,
Yes.
absolutely.
And I know we're up against the hour here. It's my belief that based on the way I was raised, and my dad and I had a lot of difficulties, philosophical difficulty. My mother used to say we were so much alike, we just disliked each other. I don't think we disliked each other, but the last 6 weeks of his life on earth I spent with him, and we repaired a lot of fences. He didn't admit to it. That was just a New England cold way of doing things, but I could feel it. But if given an opportunity, get out there, kick some butt, make a difference. One of my goals every day is take an oh my God chance on something. Who cares? So what? If you fail, fail forward, learn from it, and have some fun at the same time. I would rather have somebody think of me as the idiot in the room, but they're going to remember me as the idiot in the room.
Right.
I have no shame about looking stupid. I want to be the person that, nothing else, I've demonstrated to you that you can come to me to help solve a problem. And I'll leave you with that.
There you go.
Perfect. Yeah, Tom, we'd love to have you back again.
I can't wait to come back.
Dive deeper into some of your philosophies and the way you do things. Success is energy, and you demonstrate all that. Mark, and anything in closing, and then
I think he defined his version of success, which is, you do fall forward, and everybody looks at success differently, but I agree with you there. You just go out and do your thing, and you don't worry about what people are thinking or saying about you, because they're not thinking or saying anything about you. It's all up here in your mind, and Tom talks about this. It's about mindset, man. Just do what you got to do and get it done.
Who cares? So what? Now what?
Yep.
Let's just keep moving. And I want to give kudos to Mark. May I?
You most certainly can.
The only person that's ever taught me and made me understand what a catcher's balk was I never could understand that. And I asked him one, he finally said it to me in terms that I could get connected with me up here. A catcher's balk.
Yeah.
But I got to come back and tell some Red Sox stories. We'll get Mr. Goodwin.
Oh, yeah.
Here, right?
Oh, yeah. Ronnie,
we'll get a round robin. As they
Talk about
say.
the summer of '67 and how that team just turned New England on its ear. You could walk down my neighborhood street on a summer night. Now, didn't have air conditioning, most homes in Western Massachusetts. And you could hear the ball game on radios playing in people's houses all as you walk down your hometown street, and you wouldn't miss a pitch. Right. Because every house had the ball game on.
Yep.
Well, Tom, it has been a pleasure. I'm going to put you in the back room, and when Mark and I are going to wrap this up, and so Mark can get to his commitment that he has. And it's an honor to know you. You are fun, and I think that's part of a relationship is that, we've just recently met through our association with the Grow Life Academy, and there's certain things about people you go, man, let's connect. Let's have some fun. And you said it well tonight, my friend.
Ken Walls and Jeffrey Gittimer indirectly are responsible for this.
Well, we'll make sure he gets this message.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Talk to you soon. I loved it. Let's do it again. Let's play 2.
Yeah.
You got it, bud. You got it. Well, Mark, I know you got to run and your final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up.
High energy, off the chart, and he epitomizes the radio in the 60s, 70s. He reminds me of the movie That Thing You Do. If you've ever seen it with Tom Hanks, it's about the wonders, the one-hit wonders, and the DJs and the bands, and that's the era he came out of. And those were some exciting times, man. Radio, music, and things are so sophisticated now, but I love his old school. There's no holes barred, and he just goes for it. And I just appreciate the heck out of it. I think it's cool. Yeah,
that excitement, enthusiasm is such a powerful thing, and that's something that I've leaned into for years. Is my conviction for what I do and love what I do. And I don't care what people think. I'm not there to convince anybody. I just want to convey my message. Tom did a great job conveying that. And I got some high-tech noise here.
All right.
Little a clap there for you. Hey, it's been a pleasure. We're going to sign out. Mark, you ready to hit the road?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank
Hey,
you
Tom.
everybody for being here again. Yeah, that joined us this evening.
All right.
Outstanding.
Great. Have a great evening, everybody. God bless you. Tune in next week. Elevate your profits.